Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Pope. I'm the Marketing Director over at HooYu. Welcome to today's webinar. So today we'll be talking about the upcoming World Cup and a few stats and forecasts for revenue growth and fraud statistics. And we'll also be examining some fraud vectors about how fraudsters are going to try and target the operators at this World Cup. So thank you very much for coming along to today's webinar. We're just going to pause for 2 minutes to wait for a couple of stragglers to arrive, and we'll start the webinar at 2 minutes past the hour. So I'll go quiet for a second and we shall speak shortly. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the sunshine wherever you are today. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to examine some research that HooYu has done into the upcoming fraud and revenue growth increases at this year's World Cup. Today, if we may, we'd like to just give a brief introduction to HooYu, who we are, what we're trying to achieve in the gambling industry. And then we're going to go through some statistics that we've done by interviewing several fraud managers from gaming operators. And then at the same time, we'd like to examine abandonment in the KYC processes and how HooYu is working with operators to reduce it. And then lastly, we'd like to share with you an overview of the HooYu investigation platform that we've launched to help operators investigate customers, whether it be collusion, multiple account holders, fraud rings, affiliate fraud, and affordability for VIP and also for problem gamblers. So that's the agenda for today. If you do have questions at any time, please feel free to ask them throughout today's webinar, and we will take them at the end. To ask questions, just go to the GoToWebinar panel. And on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little area where you can type out your questions, and we'll get to those at the end of the webinar. So let's talk about HooYu to begin with. Who are we? What we're trying to achieve in the marketplace. So HooYu is a relatively new identity verification platform that launched in 2017. Our background, of course, is that we've been in identity for many, many years, and we've worked with most of the large online gambling operators and our previous companies. The team behind HooYu is actually the same team that was behind 192 Business, which we started back in 2004 and then sold to Experian in 2012. And at that point at which we had something like 1,600 clients using our traditional old school database check technologies. And obviously that included most of the big tier 1 and tier 2 operators. What we tried to do differently this time out, though, is not just to be another 192 Business, but to be the first platform that really brings together and unites the different kind of identity technologies that are out there. So the identity market is quite crowded these days. There's a lot of companies out there, but they all do something slightly different. So you have some companies that do database checks, other companies that do nothing but document validation, other companies that do facial biometrics, other companies that offer PEPs and sanctions, and other companies that might look at your digital footprint to try and drive insight into your real world identity. So I'm glad to say that because we're like the old men of identity, we're the first guys to really unite all these different technologies together into one platform. And the reason we do that isn't just so that our clients have one vendor to work with, but we do it so we can drive better insight about your players, about your customers, so that we can then look across one form of identity technology we've used and say, oh, okay, that's fine, but can we see the same address? Can we see the same date of birth, the same gender, the same name from the other sources that have been presented? So HooYu is actually a identity scoring corroboration engine that uses multiple identity technologies. And the new service we've released recently, so HooYu Identity is our account opening onboarding platform. And we have a platform that's currently called Andromeda. We're about to rebrand as HooYu Investigate. But this is a back-end investigation platform whereby our customers can really understand who their customer is and get to know them a little bit better by using data visualization technology to navigate a graph that shows who this person is, where they live, who else they've lived with, where they lived previously, what email addresses or telephone numbers are they related to, what businesses are they related to. So this is a great investigation platform that's used by the likes of Ladbrokes, for example, to really investigate customers, whether that be from the perspective of investigating collusion in peer-to-peer games, or starting to try to understand affordability for problem gamblers or even VIP gamblers. So that's a brief introduction about HooYu. Let's talk about this research that we've just published. So we interviewed several clients to really understand what they were looking for, what they were expecting come the World Cup in just under 2 weeks' time now. And so we spoke to the operators, did a little bit of desk research, and so you can download this report from our website. But essentially, we just wanted to share with the industry a few statistics on what sort of growth will the industry likely enjoy as a result of the World Cup, but also what's going to happen in terms of fraud. How will the fraudsters use the larger volume of transactions to try and fly under the radar and conduct their nefarious activities? So please feel free to download from the HooYu website. And one of the first interesting statistics we found is that, of course, football is a possession game. And according to the UK Gambling Commission, football accounts for 31% of remote sports betting revenues, which shows that obviously the World Cup is massive, and it's going to be massive to the industry in terms of the financial year ending March 17. There was £606 million of remote sportsbook betting stake value. So pretty key event for the whole industry. And now, what growth in football betting revenues do we think the bookies are going to enjoy? So we used data from the Gambling Commission again to look at growth between the 2013 revenues, which is a non-World Cup year, to football betting revenues in a World Cup year, which was 2014. So obviously football is all about XG, expected goals. This time, what's expected growth? So we can see that if in a non-cup year, if operators' football betting revenues grew by 9%, but in a World Cup year, they grew by 31%, then that means that a World Cup year, they can experience 3 times the growth of a non-World Cup year. So a pretty significant boost to the coffers. Now, how then does this translate to some of the operators' reported statistics? Well, we've got some insight from various operators, but if we look at something that we pulled from the William Hill annual report, it showed that in the first half of the tournament, growth was up 211% in the 2014 tournament compared to the 2010 tournament. So you would expect that in terms of the growth in mobile, the overall growth curve of the industry between 2010 and 2014. Sadly, what you can always expect is England to suffer the ignominy of an early exit. And so whilst growth was 211% up, whilst England was still in the tournament, as soon as England exited, then growth died off. I say died off only to a mere 80%. But overall throughout the tournament, William Hill growth was up 80% on the 2014 edition compared to the 2010 edition. So it'll be really interesting to see what levels of growth that they're going to experience this year. Now, some of the operators we spoke to really wanted to labour the point that obviously the World Cup is a massive acquisition event for them, but they were trying to see beyond that and trying to extend the customer life cycle. So they didn't see it as all about just getting numbers through the doors. But they made 2 points. First of all, that it's really the operators' game these days is about efficiencies. There's been lots of consolidations and mergers. It's all around making your site the most effective as possible. And that starts with a smooth, easy KYC process that minimizes abandonment. So that's a key focus of some of the operators that we spoke to. And one of the other operators said, look, it's not just about the tournament, but how can we work with that customer to extend the life cycle, to extend our share of wallet with that punter beyond the tournament. So again, I apologise for my cheesy football sayings as we go through these slides. So they think it's all over, but it's not yet. Obviously, that is talking about the long-term objectives for customers won during the World Cup. So which operator is going to lift the trophy in 2018? Well, here's the reported growth rates, again, pulled from the annual reports of the operators. Here's the growth rates that they enjoyed in the last edition in 2014. So William Hill leading the way there, growing by 80%. Bet365 coming in a fairly distant second, and then Laddie's, Paddy Power Betfair, and 888 bringing up the rear. But even so, for any business to be able to grow by 16% a year, it's got to be pretty good going. So this is the kind of magnitude of growth that a range of operators saw over the course of the last World Cup. So that's the good news. Now for the bad news. So some of the fraud managers, in fact, one of the fraud managers we spoke to put a number on it. And whilst they would expect attempted card fraud rates to stay level at 2%, they're well aware that in a World Cup campaign that fraud rate is going to increase. Now, this is because the fraudsters, they try and pile in amongst all the morass of other transactions so that their transactions are harder to detect. It's no different, of course, to online retailers seeing a spike in fraud, attempted fraud in peak season at Christmas. And this is when the fraudsters are going to strike. So the question is, why is it that the fraud attempts rate go up? Well, one of the operators we spoke to said that they're going to be having lots more new transactions from different geographies, different time zones, which is something that they find tough to handle, particularly as it means new customers from new geographies, new names and customers and identifiers to verify that don't fall within the normal pot of transactions. Another operator said that the increase in fraud in part is going to be due to the fact that they're going to be covering more markets. And there's some great analysis that is in the report that looks at how many markets are served on average over a Premiership 7-day period, or a Bundesliga or a Serie A, versus how many markets can be served over the first 7 days of the World Cup. So new markets means more places to look for fraud. One of the other areas that the report looked at was how might the fraudsters strike. So we, after speaking to several operators, we compiled this this fraud vector, this fraud typology. We called it the customer hit and run, which is really less about fraudsters stealing identities to go and create new accounts, but more about how fraudsters are targeting existing accounts to do fraud against existing account holders and to target the operators that way. So this first part of the chart, this first part of the attack vector, deals with how the fraudsters get hold of the accounts to begin with. So there's several ways that they do it. There's the old school way here at option 3, whereby fraudsters try to use insiders with the gambling operators to copy customers' lists, and then they will call the customers, pretending to be the bookie and ask them to reset the security over the phone. That's very much the lo-fi route. The high-tech route, of course, is whereby bots will bombard the operators with password account change requests, which will then enable them to see which accounts are actually held by which operators. And then the same bots, they bombard the email owner with brute force attempts to try and log in. And then once they've got access to the email account, then they can go back to the operator and manually request a security reset to change the password on that account, and then hey presto, they own that account. Another way, of course, that the fraudsters are doing it with their tech is that they use phishing farms to send out millions upon millions of emails with spoof operator websites. So they'll use the logo of William Hill, but it'll be William Hill with 3ls.com for argument's sake, that they'll be using as their domain, and then they'll direct the customer there. It will look and feel like the real William Hill website, and of course the customer is then logging in and resetting security on the fraudster's website, not on the real operator website. Then at that point, again, the fraudster owns the account. It's interesting to note that some of the typologies are that where the fraudster is working with the customer to change the password, in other words, where they're using the fake gambling website, or whether they've done it over the phone, they actually do change the password on the website to that which the customer has specified, so that should the customer then try and log in, then they're able to log in and they don't see anything that's gone amiss. So that's a way that they stay under the radar, even though they've actually already done the hit and run on the customer and they own that account. So once they're then in the account, what is it that they do? So this is the next part. So several of the operators we spoke to said that one of the most common techniques, and some operators guard against this well and others don't in my experience, but some of the operators said that when the fraudster requests a change in the payment method, namely from debit or credit card to an online wallet, then at that point, several operators identified that as a weakness in their defense against the fraudsters, and there were no checks carried out at that point of payment method change. So of course, at that point, the fraudster is cashing out. They're not even gambling. They're just doing a straightforward cash out and running off with the money. So obviously at that point, when the real customer complains, the operator is out of funds, and they're duty bound under the Data Protection Act and GDPR to make a report about that compromised account to the Commissioner's Office, the Information Commissioner's Office, and of course to the Gambling Commission. So this is one area, of course, where HooYu can come in. So HooYu Identify, our identity verification and onboarding platform, it can actually be deployed at any point in the customer lifecycle. Most commonly, we're used by operators at point of account opening, but it can be deployed programmatically at any risk-based approach as deemed by the operators. And that could be a high-value cash out. It could be a security reset process. It could be a high-value deposit, and so on and so forth. And that can be done programmatically using the API, or of course, it can be done manually by the operator's agents in the office by issuing a HooYu request that arrives on the customer's phone as a text or an email that comes from the operator and drives them into the HooYu verification process. And the HooYu process, of course, works by bringing together the multiple identity technologies, works by bringing together the geolocation technology, the facial biometrics, the ID document validation, proof of address matching, fraud alert rules, database checks, PEPs and sanctions, and a range of other technologies. So that's one of the typologies of fraud and how HooYu guards against it. So please do feel free to download the report from the HooYu website. So just go to this page, just pop in there your name and an email address, and you can download that report. So one of the reasons we wanted to make this report is to examine what's causing abandonment in the KYC process. Again, to come back to what we were saying earlier, how these days is all around the effectiveness of the funnel. the cost of acquisition for a new gambling customer is getting higher and higher. And so now many operators are focusing as much on the digital journey and the tightening up of the funnel as they are on spending marketing dollars to acquire customers. So this is one of the problems we see typically with clients in terms of how they're losing customers at point of KYC. And of course, these days, it's becoming more homogenous in terms of when the KYC is triggered. But in some jurisdictions, it's still a point of payout, whereas in other jurisdictions, it's a point of registration or deposit. So same the world over, the operators use the identity database check where possible. And if the identity database works, if their customer is from a country where there is an identity database, then great, brilliant, all well and good. And it's the same that we see with online gambling operators, that we see with banks, that we see with prepaid card issuers. Where the database check doesn't work, the application tends to grind to a halt. The customer might receive a little message on the screen saying, oh, sorry, we can't open your account today, call our call center. Or they might receive an email that drives them to a web page that asks them to upload some identity documents. But the point is, in that process, when the application slows down, the application grinds to a halt, abandonment and delay sets in. And that's when customers abandon and go and make their bet elsewhere, go and put their deposit elsewhere, in fact. So this kind of lack of plan B at account opening means that operators are losing customers. And even with the big operators still, there's no process to capture and validate identity documents. There's still a lack of process there to be able to then rescue that customer, rescue that deposit, and make sure it's not abandoned and try and win the customer. So this is how HooYu is working with gaming operators. So let's suppose the customer is at registration, deposit, or payout. They go into the HooYu identity verification process. So the first thing that HooYu does is to check the identity databases from the credit reference agencies here in the UK to the point whereby we can confirm that that customer exists with that name, at that address, with that date of birth, and there's no matches to any negative databases as well. By negative databases, we mean databases of dead people, databases of PEPs and sanctions, so organised criminals, terrorist financiers, and so on and so forth. And that's obviously all laid down in the licensing conditions and codes of practice that says when the customer is being verified for a payout, it has to become an anti-money laundering check rather than just an age verification check. So at that point, if the customer is verified, that's great, they're approved. But commonly in the UK, there's 25% or so, sometimes as high as 30% of customers that can't be verified with a database check, and that's where HooYu swings into action. So if there's a no match or a thin match against the databases, then HooYu automatically wakes up inside your website and your customer is given a digital journey that enables them to take a picture of their ID document. Optionally, they can also take a selfie, so HooYu can perform a biometric facial comparison between the face in the selfie and the face in the ID document. Depending on your regulatory requirements as well, your customer can be asked to provide a address document, and HooYu then goes on to verify the identity document and to search the address document for this same name and address that's held on the customer application to make sure you're getting a valid proof of address document as well. So once we've done that kind of work, HooYu's job is to then produce an overall identity confidence report that confirms how well we verified the date of birth, the name, the address, has there been biometric facial comparison, has the customer gone through the correct gates to provide you with the correct information, and at that point then you can open up the customer account so the customer can begin gambling straight away, or of course you can approve the payout straight away. So that's how HooYu is working with gambling operators. And then lastly for today, the new service we've recently released is our investigation platform. And so HooYu Identify is the onboarding, the KYC platform. HooYu Investigate is the back-end platform for your agents then conduct investigations when you already have concerns around a particular customer. and that concern can be driven by lots of different use cases. It can be driven by fear of collusion between account holders for poker. It could be driven by concern that customer is operating multiple accounts. It could be driven by concerns around maybe a fraud ring is targeting you, or a fear about affiliate lead fraud. But commonly what we see a lot of our clients really embracing within our investigation platform is to try and understand affordability. And that's a big buzzword at the moment, source of funds. What the HooYu investigation platform will do is help you really understand that customer. Who are they? Where do they live? Are they a homeowner? Do they own that property? Do they have any relations to companies in terms of shareholdings and directorships? So it really starts to give you more insight to that customer, so you can say to your regulator, yes, look, here's the investigation we've done. This is how we started to try and understand affordability on this particular transaction. So the way that's commonly done to date is using lots of spreadsheets, lots of databases, lots of different sources of information. And this is what it kind of looks like, all the stuff that the operator has to grind through. But the point about this is that, yes, your agents can do it. They'll be able to see the pattern, understand who the customer is, understand the rationale for the transaction. But it takes time. It's time consuming to review and digest information in this kind of format, and it's hard to discern trends and links. So instead, what HooYu does is to turn that into a graph database, whereby you don't have to look at the data in tabular format. You can look at it as a network. So you can look at your search subject in the center and investigate your customer in such a way that you can then navigate the graph to see where they live, who they live with, where they used to live with, who they used to live with, which is particularly good for collusion investigations. And then you can start to, if it's from an affordability perspective, look at property ownership. You can look at some initial financial stress indicators such as CCJs and insolvencies. And really, this is how we put your customer at the center of a graph, so you can understand everything about them in one place. So we've recently added email addresses and 30 million mobile phone numbers to the HooYu Investigate platform. And this really enables you to start the investigation just with a telephone number or an email address, or an address or a business name or a person's name, and traverse a graph from there. So it makes it much quicker. The data visualization approach makes it much quicker to be able to analyze who your customers are. But one of the fantastic things that our clients are getting from this is what we call accidental enlightenment. This investigation platform enables you to be able to run what we call a shortest path analysis, using as many degrees of separation as you need to be able to understand how one address is associated with another address, how one email address or phone number is associated with another phone number, how one person is associated with another person, how one business is associated with another person, how one person is associated with a business. So it's a very powerful fraud investigation tool that's being used by multiple operators at the moment, such as Ladbrokes and some of the other big guys. So that was an overview of how HooYu is working in the online gambling industry. We'd be happy to take any questions today. So if you have any questions, please fire them at us using the portal on the right-hand side, and we'll go through that process for you. Okay, so we already had some questions come in whilst the webinar was going on. So which checks do you conduct when verifying a document? So when we verify the ID document, what we do is we examine it to look for evidence of forgery and tampering. So there, for example, let's suppose that there's a fraudster called David Pope, and he wants to become John Smith. What they will do is to take the O in Pope to make the A in John, the O in John, take the I in David to make the I in Smith. Then they might change one of the document numbers to restate the date of birth, When that happens, we see the same pixels in more than one place in the same image, so we know there's some kind of forgery and tampering that's going on. Then we will also check the machine readable zone. So let's say, for example, your surname is Pope, you're male, you're British, you're born in 1974. Then that means the 17th character has to be Y, the 3rd character has to be M, the 17th character has to be 0, and so on and so forth. So that enables us to know that we've got working with a document that's got a proper date of birth, document number, date of expiry, and so on and so forth. And obviously, with HooYu, we have both an automated and a manual document validation process. And on the automated process, that takes perhaps 30 seconds for us to use just technology to validate the ID document. And where it gets passed to our manual document processors who are based here in the UK, what happens then is they blow it up on their screen. They look for further evidence of forgery or tampering. They look for the holograms. Are they the right holograms? Are they in the right place? Then they'll look at the microprint, which is all the funny little patterns in the background. Then they will look at the kineogram, which is where the document number, for example, has to be either pinholed or laser burnt through a certain part of the document, depending on the country of issue, the year of issue. There's all sorts of clever things that they will do with ID cards. So based on the year of issue and the country of issue, then the little chip in ID cards has to have a certain pattern on the chip. Then they will do a contextual analysis. Are all the security features working together nicely? Is the hologram on top of the laminate? Is the photo underneath the laminate? Is the microprint edging its way across the top of the photo? They'll do a font check and a layout check. So there's a range of checks that they'll do. So thank you very much for that question. So the next question is, which checks do we carry out on the address document? So on the address document, we're not doing security checks on utility bills or bank statements because there are no security features on those documents. It takes probably less than 10 minutes for a fraudster to create a utility bill in Microsoft Word. And so that sort of process is not fit for purpose. What we're doing there is confirming that it's a valid match to the name and the address on the application. So you can say, yep, we have an address document that matches the name and the address, and then we use the HooYu API to push back to you the image of the address document, the image of the ID document, and the image of the selfie as well. Okay, so predictably we have a GDPR question, so thank you very much for that. So the question is, how are you gathering GDPR consent for the information database checks that you use to check each individual? So we've designed every element of HooYu. It's been engineered with data protection in mind, and we work with one of the ex-Assistant Information Commissioners who we retain as a consultant to help us with data protection matters. So within data protection, obviously consent has to be explicit. So first of all, when the HooYu process is served, we serve a GDPR notice that states HooYu's role within the GDPR process, and that we'll be processing data, and we state what we do and what we do and what we don't do within the data. And then the point at which the user, the customer, provides the information, their consent is explicit because they're providing it there and then to HooYu in the process, in the act of taking the selfie, taking the photo of the ID document, because it's all user-generated content. And of course, in terms of data protection, we're not retaining all this information. We have a very strict data deletion policy, whereby we don't retain the copies of your customers' ID documents. We don't retain their date of birth. We try and purge as much data as possible from the HooYu process so that we only retain enough information to be able to confirm an audit trail of what verification was done and what the results are. In terms of the databases that we use, so the consent to use the database check must be explicit in the user's terms and conditions. And then in terms of the HooYu Investigate platform, the data we use there is publicly available data as well as other consented databases. where the user has consented for their data to be made available within that database. So there's a very strict data protection GDPR process that goes on throughout. Okie doke. So next question then is around what countries do we cover? So HooYu is very much a global service. We verify identity documents from something like 220 different countries in terms of passport, driving license, ID card, residence permit, travel visa. Now, within some of those countries, some documents can't be verified automatically. Part of the aim of HooYu is to strike the right balance between risk and convenience, between security and convenience. So where we can, we push the document through an automatic validation process, but there's some kind of documents that just can't be done using technology because they don't have good security features that can be read by a computer vision. So say, for example, the Irish paper driving license or the Italian paper ID card, those kind of documents do go through a manual process. Okay, and last question for today is how long does it take? So on the automatic HooYu document verification process, what we do there is we take 30 seconds or thereabouts to use our technology to validate the identity document. The facial biometrics is a technological process as well, not a human-led judgment. And we publish SLAs to our clients, but say, for example, it's 98% of automatic verifications are done in less than a minute, average 30 seconds. And then we also share an SLA with our client, which is negotiable based on volume and that kind of other issues. We negotiate that with our client on the manual document verification. So I think that's pretty much the questions finished for the day. So thank you very much for your time today, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any questions, please do reach out. My contact details are on the screen. And I'll make sure that we come back to you with written answers to all the questions that you put to us today. So thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoy some of the sunshine this afternoon, and we'll speak to you all again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.